Hi, I'm Matt Thompson. Welcome to the Oregon Coast Railroad. Building my HO scale Oregon Coast Railroad, I try to make all of the parts, the engines, the track, the structures, and the scenery fit together to tell the railroad story. I enjoy the thought process and the learning involved in choosing railroad cars that support my vision of how the railroad should look. For me, it's all part of the fun of model railroading. This video is about several of those cars. And regardless of the reasons the cars are on my layout and the prototype comments I make, the real reason is because the cars intrigue me and I enjoy them. My 1957 layout is a fictional small branch railroad serving lumber and agricultural customers in the northwest corner of Oregon. Most of the cars are ordinary, just box cars, reefers, flat cars, and the like that serve the OCRR's customers. But ordinary can be good. Few of the cars are pretty, most are weathered. Rather than ordinary, I think of them as railroad functional. I want cars that are highly detailed. Rather than cast-on detail, I look for freestanding ladders and grab irons, and accurate lettering as best I know it. My cars are from Tangent, Rapido, Intermountain, Red Caboose, and similar manufacturers. My railroad story is that the fictional OCRR is owned by the Spokane, Portland, and Seattle Railroad, which was actually owned jointly by the Northern Pacific and the Great Northern. My OCRR runs from Portland, Oregon to Astoria along the Columbia River. In the real world, this was the SP&S's A line. In my world, the Oregon Coast Railroad owns the A line. From Astoria, the line runs south to Coos Bay where it interchanges with the Southern Pacific. In the real world, no railroad ever paralleled the coast in this area. The area is just too unpopulated and too rugged. So this is just my fictional scenario. The location is a big factor in choosing cars and road names. The OCRR's remote location means there's no bridge traffic. Some car types don't fit because their loads aren't correct for the area. As an example, there was never any coal mining in Oregon, and the SP&S used oil for fuel, even in the days of steam. So coal hoppers would have been uncommon in the area, and I don't have any. Also, it's hard to think about how cars of some railroads would have traveled here, like cars from the Florida East Coast Railroad or the Mississippi Central, another Deep South railroad. It could have happened, but it would seem so atypical that I don't have any cars from such faraway small railroads on the layout. Only 5 of my 350 cars are resin kits. I'm not very skilled and not very experienced at building them. Still, I think the serious builders of resin kits have raised the bar on the quality of models on the market. So all of us who value that quality owe them a special thanks. I also learn a lot from reading these two blogs with their many comments about prototype cars of the transition era and the bloggers' efforts to model them. There probably aren't more than 20 to 25 serious contributors to these blogs, but they're all extremely knowledgeable and marvelous craftsmen. That said, I'm sure each of them could spend hours telling me the mistaken details and lettering on the cars that I like so much and run in my railroad. I appreciate that they are the experts, but I'm also a model railroader, happy with what I have. Lifelike made Proto 2000 cars as their top-of-the-line models, and Walthers continues the name today. I'm a big fan, and you'll see several of their cars as I continue. With their weights and good trucks, they are free-rolling and track well, always a plus. Even the very knowledgeable car modelers on the blogs I just mentioned have good things to say about their accuracy. My only real complaint is their car selection is limited to the car types you see here and just a few others. Proto 2000 50-foot box cars come in many road names to include the Union Pacific, Southern Pacific, Cotton Belt, Erie, Santa Fe, and New York Central. They're also offered in two-door, single-door, and end-door options, depending on the road name. The prototypes were built in the 40s, so they are time period appropriate. Lifelike offered the cars both as ready to run and in kit form. As far as I know, the Waltzers releases are only ready to run. For me, one of the great things was Lifelike's undecorated kits, which I built and lettered for the OCRR. They're still easily available on the internet. In total, I have 22 of these cars on my layout. Most are SP, but 6 are lettered for my own railroad. It's Oregon, so you would expect log cars. In Oregon and most western states, loggers use skeleton cars. The best I have found are these cars from River Rossi. The frames are metal and they have metal free-rolling wheels, so they ride well even when they're not loaded. They are sold ready to run. I did change out all the couplers for KDs. That's actually true for most of my cars. River Rossi offered the cars in several road names, but since my cars aren't used in interchange, I took off the lettering. I also added some bark and other debris so the cars look like what I remember from growing up in this area. I made removable loads by mixing plastic logs from both River Rossi and Walthers. Log cars go to mills where the logs are turned into lumber or paper. Cutting, trimming, and debarking the logs results in wood chips. Chips were sold as hog fuel, that is home heating fuel used in wood stoves, or mills would burn the chips as waste in wigwam burners near the mills. Unfortunately, hot ashes from the slash burners often started fires in the surrounding woods. Not a good business practice. In 1957, or by 1957, chips had become raw materials for wood products, things like pressed wood and chipboard. Railroads were not fond of chip loads. They were light, so they didn't pay well. The railroad solution was to only agree to haul the chips if they also got the business to haul the finished products. In the meantime, railroads rounded up whatever spare open cars they could find and added sides to haul the chips. In some cases, they simply cut the roof off of old boxcars. The SP&S bought second-hand Coswell gondolas from the Santa Fe and built them up for wood chip service. The Black Hopper is a Northern Pacific car with sides added in NP shops. All of these models are from Intermountain. Some came with extended sides. In other cases, I added my own sides. To continue the story of the OCRR and its lumber hauling, here are finished loads of lumber. The car on the upper left is a Southern Pacific 50-foot gondola from Tangent. The load is a plastic kit from Owl Mountain. Easy to build and looks great. Top right, the first car is another Proto 2000 offering one of their 50-foot flat cars. They are well weighted with good trucks, so they track well even without loads. Here, the load kits are from fine end scale. The lumber stacks are realistically colored castings, and the kits come with strip wood to secure the loads. They're made for N scale, but a stack of N scale 4x8s is a stack of HO scale 2x4s, so they work just fine. In this picture, an OCRR engine is switching a warehouse at Christopher Paper Mill, which makes newsprint. The picture is not about the models, it's about how railroads and industries use cars. Newsprint is heavy, oftentimes was shipped many hundred miles, and in the 1950s, newspapers used a lot of it. In other words, Christopher Paper is just the kind of industry a railroad would want to serve. The SP would make sure the cars were watertight, clean, and provided on time. It worked hard to keep this business, and that's why normally only Southern Pacific cars would be serving a rail customer like this. Portland Union Stockyards and the Swift Meatpacking Plant are big industries on the OCRR. All of my stock cars are Proto 2000 models of Mather cars. They were offered lettered for the Northern Pacific Mather's own leasing service. I also have relettered many of the cars for the OCRR. Proto 2000 offers the cars in several other lettering schemes. I've also kit batched several into 50-foot stock cars. That's what you see here. The work is simple. Cut two cars in half, trim the roof and the floor, and rejoin the bodies. The only extra work then is to make new doors. One story is that the Mather company made the 50-footers by saving the best parts of deteriorating 40-foot cars. Other sources say no, it's just that stock cars do not gross out on weight and 50-foot cars are more efficient for railroad purposes. The MR article I followed was for making a nickel plate double-deck stock car for hauling hogs, but I chose to make my models single-deck cars for cattle, which was also prototypical. I saw this car on Howard Zane's layout. I was intrigued by its distinctive look. Howard couldn't remember who made the kit, but with little internet research, I found it was an Android model and bought one. The kit was nice, but coarse by today's standards, so instead of adding trucks, I put it on stacked ties and made it hay storage at the stock pens. The swift packing plant on my layout is my biggest industry. During operating sessions, the job keeps a crew of 2 busy for the entire session, so I need lots of swift reefers. Even so, my 24 cars are a drop in the bucket compared to the real swift fleet of more than 3,700 cars in 1950. Cars were wood-sided until mechanical reefers with metal bodies were introduced in 1954. None are pictured here, but Intermountain has sold models of them, and I have a few. The 2 cars in the back are Atlas models from their mainline series. Like Proto 2000 models, they look good and run well. Atlas released 10 different numbers, which I have, plus a few others with numbers I changed to avoid duplicates. The car on the left has a silver painted roof, a modification Swift made to many of their cars over the years. The front models are from Rapido. Their red paint scheme was introduced in 1950, but it took time to repaint the whole fleet, so I run both schemes. Rapido has released these cars twice, but the Swift reefers sold out quickly, so I bought Rapido kits and decals from Tichy and painted and lettered additional cars for my railroad. Incidentally, meat reefers and reefers built for produce are not interchangeable. Meat reefers have hanging racks for sides of beef. They also use an ice salt brine to cool the cars instead of just ice, more common to produce reefers. Pacific Fruit Express was the biggest produce hauler, but they did have a few hundred meat reefers. Intermountain released models of these cars with the appropriate car numbers and appropriate markings on the outside, but I haven't been able to find any. How can you be a model railroad and not love the Santa Fe? Their produce refrigerator cars were run by the Santa Fe Refrigerator Division. 50-foot reefers came to the prototype in 1940, but were rare. Of the Santa Fe's 14,000 refrigerator cars, only a few hundred were 50-footers. Still, I like the models. The details are good, the car weight is correct, and they ride well. Athearn has also released this model, lettered for the Northern Pacific and a few others. All of these reefers are from Intermountain or Red Caboose. They're all produce reefers. Prototype railroads did not like to own single-use cars, like a reefer that could go out loaded but would return empty. Since railroads were paid by the weight for the things they shipped, empties were losers. Even finding substitute loads for return trips wasn't a great incentive. For instance, backhauling lumber in a reefer wasn't much of a solution because the capacity of the cars was limited due to the interior space devoted to cooling. They also didn't like the special facilities needed, like icing docks, and the extra car handling they required. For produce transport companies like PFE, having reefers and icing platforms was a cost of doing business, like carts at a grocery store, and they determined their rates accordingly. The largest fleet of produce cars belongs to the Pacific Fruit Express, a joint venture of the Southern Pacific and the Union Pacific, and later joined by the Western Pacific. In 1950, they had more than 37,000 cars. 6 of the cars here are PFE cars. On the bottom left, the car shows a Union Pacific medallion there would have been a Southern Pacific medallion on the other side. On the far right is a Western Pacific car with the same medallions on both sides. In the middle of the bottom row are two cars with experimental paint schemes. Neither scheme lasted long, and the football curved corners were long gone before the dark red striped version was tried. Also, both were long gone before my time, 1957, but they're interesting cars I enjoy, and so the cars will stay in the layout. At the top right is a 1946 PFE paint scheme evolution with both logos shown on both sides of the cars. Tony Thompson wrote the book on the PFE, 450 pages worth of it. He also has a great website talking about the PFE, the Southern Pacific, and many other interesting subjects. Fruit Growers Express grew from the Armour Meat Company and then became a joint venture of Fruit Growers Express and Great Northern, who then formed the Western Fruit Express. In 1950, they had 12,000 cars. The Northern Pacific was one of the few railroads that maintained their own fleet of refrigerator cars. Most tank cars, like refrigerator cars, were privately owned. That creates a great variety of paint schemes, car sizes, car appliances, and car types to carry different products. The big domes on several of these cars are for loading at the top and using gravity to unload from the bottom, common to gasoline, oil, and other petroleum products. Multiple compartments, like the Celanese car, allowed shippers to send the car to multiple customers wanting less than a carload delivery, or to ship multiple products in the same car, or some variation of both. The thinner domes on some of these cars were for gases loaded under pressure. Loading and unloading were both done from the top. Platforms were an option car owners might choose based on cost and the configuration of their loading and unloading facilities. Notice the black and orange cars in the middle. The seams on their ends shows they are insulated for products needing temperature protection. All of these variations make it interesting to track down which types of cars and which tank car companies would have cars on the OCRR. The red hooker car, rather than the more common orange, is correctly colored, but I don't know why that happened. The car hauled liquid chlorine from Hooker's Tacoma, Washington plant. That makes it the perfect car to serve Christopher Paper in Vancouver on the Oregon Coast Railroad. The models were a custom order, never released to Atlas dealers. My friend John King had one and gave it to me because he felt it was perfect for my layout. I agreed and offered to buy it. He didn't want money, but did demand lifetime visitation rights. I think we're both happy with the deal. Most railroads didn't have tank cars for revenue service, but there are always exceptions. The big S in the rectangle on this car's dome marks a car that carries liquid sugar. I use it to supply a large commercial bakery in the Kenton area of Portland. Occasionally, the SP&S would haul gas or oil in their tankers for railroad customers, but normally the cars were used to supply its own facilities. The SP&S, like many railroads, especially in the West, had tank cars to support their own fueling and repair facilities in remote locations. Railroads would use water cars to serve the same locations. They also might be included in work trains that had kitchen cars. In Oregon, I remember water tank cars added to the front or back or both ends of freight trains during the height of the summer fire season. With pumps and hoses, crews could tamp down minor fires along the right-of-way. A problem with modeling the northwest corner of Oregon in the 1950s is few model cars were made lettered for the SP&S, so when Atlas released these Ballast cars, I scooped them up. I've been very satisfied. Besides being correct for the railroad in the era, they have metal frames and good trucks and wheels, so they roll nicely. I also have two of these cars lettered for the Northern Pacific, which is prototypically correct. Adair Shops makes weights for model railroad cars. Some of their offerings come as kits for open carloads. Each girder and each metal sheet is an ounce. The kits also come with strip wood and instructions to get the results you can see here. The 50-foot flat car is another Proto 2000 model and comes with enough weight to be usable without a load. The car in the back is a tissue kit. The kit is nice, but the narrow sill makes adding weight almost impossible, and the car is too light to stay on the track without a load. Adair has solved that problem. As Penske fans and Rapido advertisements like to say, the Penske was everywhere, so these cars are good on the OCRR. I'm a Rapido fan. The cars are well detailed, nicely painted and lettered, and run smoothly. I added the removable Adair load to the flat car for operating reasons, but the model as sold has good running qualities without additional weight. I like covered hoppers, but they weren't used for hauling grain, a logical load on the OCRR, until the early 60s, too late for me. I do use the Great Northern car for hauling lime to Christopher Paper. But then I got my reward for following the blogs. Ted Sullivan was a freight clerk for the Northern Pacific around 1960, and he also wrote a color guide for the Northern Pacific. He also comments often about cars on the Northern Pacific Group's I.O. site. He said the Intermountain Black Hoppers were models of cars used in the 1950s to carry feed and fertilizer. Perfect. They fit my layout. Todd also said at the time all the distinctions of covered hoppers hadn't been figured out, so they were treated like gondolas, other hoppers, and flat cars, that is, painted black with white lettering. If cars are interesting to you, there are some great references available. Morning Sun hardbacks are a bit expensive at $60, but they also have some soft covers for $40, and many of their books, especially the older ones, are available in digital form for $20. It doesn't take many books to make a useful reference library. These 4 books are probably half of my total collection. Kalmbach also has some handy books. My favorites are the Industry Series books. The industry-specific books each has at least a chapter on the cars that serve those industries, and normally the chapter covers the whole time frame, so it may show a variety of cars serving an industry at different times. Well, that's it. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it.